1. Intro, the night everything spoke without words. Some nights don't need words to break you, they do it with silence. If you've ever felt someone slipping away without saying a thing, this story will find you. Before we continue, hit subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcasts so you don't miss the truths we whisper in the dark. Now, let me take you back to the night everything spoke louder without a single sound. 2. Setup, their life before the breakdown. Before everything fell apart, their life looked almost ordinary from the outside. Lena and Caleb were the kind of couple people described as solid, two steady souls moving through the world with a quiet kind of harmony. They shared late-night grocery runs, inside jokes no one else understood, and those soft forehead kisses that say more than long speeches ever could. But life doesn't break in one dramatic moment, it fractures in small, invisible ways. Caleb had been drowning in deadlines for months, coming home with shoulders tight and eyes that never really settled. He told himself he was just tired, just busy, just trying to build a future for them. But what Lena felt wasn't the future, it was the distance. She still waited up for him, still set aside the better slice of dinner for him, still asked how his day was. And every time his answer was a distracted, fine, something delicate inside her dimmed. She didn't stop loving him. She just stopped knowing where she fit in his world. And Caleb, believing everything was stable, never noticed the shift, never saw how often her smile flickered, how often she hesitated before speaking, how often her hands shook when she reached for the light at night. They were still together, but already drifting, like two people holding the same rope from opposite ends, unaware of how loose the grip had become. 3. The shift. The first night she stopped responding. The shift didn't arrive with yelling or slammed doors. It came quietly, so quietly that Caleb didn't even realize the moment their life tilted. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where the sky felt heavy and the apartment hummed with that soft, tired silence two people share when they've had long days. Caleb walked in late again, dropping his keys on the counter with a dull clink. He didn't notice the way Lena startled at the sound. He asked how her day was, not really looking up, scrolling through emails as he spoke. She answered softly, something about a meeting, something about feeling overwhelmed, but the words barely left her mouth before she realized he wasn't truly listening. His landed like a weight, and that was the first moment she felt herself retreat, like a tide pulling away from shore. Later that night, they had a small disagreement, nothing dramatic, just a forgotten text, a late reply, a promise Caleb thought he had kept but hadn't. He tried to explain, but his voice carried the impatience of someone who felt attacked while exhausted. Lena's voice, in contrast, grew smaller with each exchange. At one point, she opened her mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Not because she didn't have words, but because she didn't believe they mattered. Caleb asked, "Are you going to say something?" She looked at him, eyes glossy, lips parted but frozen. And for the first time since they'd met, she didn't respond. Not out of anger, not out of defiance, but because something inside her simply shut off. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared toward the window, letting the streetlight paint a thin line across her face. Caleb thought she was giving him the cold shoulder. In truth, she was drowning in a silence she didn't know how to escape. He sighed, frustrated, and walked away. She didn't follow. And the room, usually warm with their familiar rhythm, suddenly felt unbearably wide. That was the night her silence began, not as a choice, but as a collapse. 4. The crack. Silence turns into distance. In the days that followed, the silence didn't just stay, it grew roots. What started as a single moment of Lena shutting down became a quiet rhythm neither of them knew how to break. Caleb kept telling himself it was temporary, that she just needed space, That work was draining him too much to deal with feelings right now. But distance doesn't announce itself, it creeps in like fog, soft, thin, impossible to notice until everything is blurred. Every night, Lena sat on the far end of the couch, legs tucked in, fingers tracing the hem of her sweater. She wanted to speak. She rehearsed sentences in her head. I'm scared you don't see me anymore. I'm scared I don't matter. But every time she inhaled, her throat tightened, words stayed trapped between her ribs. Caleb saw the silence as withdrawal. Lena felt it as collapse. He tried small gestures, bringing her tea, turning on her favorite show, brushing his hand across her shoulder, but her responses were soft and short, almost fragile. And because he didn't know how to ask deeper questions, he convinced himself she just needed time. One evening, Lena wrote him a small note. Not a dramatic confession, just a few honest lines. I feel like I'm fading. I don't know how to reach you. But as soon as she finished, the fear hit her. Fear that he'd dismiss it. Fear that it wouldn't change anything. She folded the note, then tore it into pieces so small the words disappeared. Caleb watched her from the hallway. Not the note, just the way her shoulders slumped. He wanted to step forward, but something in him hesitated, pride, exhaustion, or maybe the belief that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow wasn't better. They ate dinner in silence. They went to bed in silence. They woke up in silence. And the space between them, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like the quiet distance between two strangers waiting for a train that never comes. 5. The truth. What her silence was really saying. The truth behind Lena's silence wasn't coldness. It wasn't anger. It wasn't punishment. It was fear, quiet, heavy, and exhausting. Not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that makes you freeze. Inside her, a voice whispered endlessly, "You're becoming invisible to him." Every unanswered question, every distracted, "yeah," every night he came home with eyes fixed on anything but her, added one more crack to a heart already trying its best to hold together. Lena wasn't shutting him out. She was shrinking. She was trying not to take up space, trying not to become a burden, trying not to ask for more than he seemed able to give. She remembered the moments he once held her face gently and asked, "What's going on in that beautiful head of yours?" But lately, when she opened her mouth, Caleb didn't notice the way she hesitated. He didn't see the way her fingers trembled when she tried to reach for him. Her silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything she never said. "I'm scared you don't choose me anymore. I'm scared I'm harder to love now. I'm scared you're slipping away and you won't even see it happening." And the cruel thing about silence is that it can sound like indifference when, in reality, it's overflowing with unsaid emotion. Caleb saw a woman who stopped talking. He didn't see the woman who cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear. He didn't see her rehearse conversations she never had the courage to start. He didn't notice the moments she almost reached for his hand, then pulled back because it felt unwanted. Her silence was not a wall, it was a signal flare. A plea wrapped in quiet. A heart saying, "Please hear me, even when I can't find the words." But Caleb misread every sign. And she grew quieter with each misunderstanding, until her silence became the only language she could speak without getting hurt. 6. The turning point, the night Caleb finally heard her. The night everything shifted didn't look dramatic from the outside. No storm, no shouting, just a quiet apartment, a dim lamp, and a woman trying her best not to fall apart where someone could see her. Caleb came home later than usual, shoulders heavy, mind still stuck in spreadsheets and deadlines. He expected the same distant silence he'd grown used to, cold, confusing, frustrating, but what he walked into was something entirely different. Lena sat on the floor by the window, Knees pulled to her chest. Headphones on, not the kind you wear to relax, but the kind you use to muffle your own heartbeat. Her eyes were fixed on nothing, and her breathing came in shallow, uneven waves. She didn't even look up when he opened the door. For the first time, Caleb really saw her. The slump of her shoulders. The way her hands trembled as she wiped her nose. The exhaustion that looked older than the past few months. He whispered her name, Lena, but she didn't react. Not because she was ignoring him, but because she was somewhere far deeper inside herself, locked behind all the emotions she never said aloud. Caleb sank down beside her, not touching her, just close enough to feel the shaking in her breath. He didn't speak. He didn't defend himself. He didn't ask her what was wrong. He simply let the silence settle, and for the first time, he listened to it. It was heavy. It was frightened. It was full of all the things she had been carrying alone. When Lena finally pulled her headphones off, she didn't look at him, but he heard her anyway, in the way her lip quivered. In the way her chest rose as if bracing for impact. And in that fragile stillness, Caleb realized, her silence had never been empty. It had been screaming. And he had been deaf to it. So he did the only thing he knew wouldn't break her further, he stayed. He sat beside her through every quiet minute, letting her know, not with words but with presence, that he was finally here, finally listening, finally hearing the pain she could never say out loud. 7. The resolution. What silence taught them. In the days after that night, something subtle but undeniable began to shift. They didn't magically fix everything. There were no dramatic speeches, no perfect apologies, no cinematic reunions. What changed wasn't loud, it was steady. Caleb started coming home earlier, not because he was told to, but because he finally understood the cost of being absent. He put his phone down when she spoke, even if she only managed a few words. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't rush her healing. He simply stayed present, like someone relearning how to hold what is fragile without gripping too hard. And Lena, slowly, carefully, began to uncoil. She wasn't suddenly outspoken or fearless, but she started letting him see the pieces she once hid, the trembling hands, the quiet tears, the hesitations she used to swallow. Every time she opened up even an inch, Caleb met her with softness instead of frustration. That consistency became the bridge back to each other. They learned that communication isn't always about talking. Sometimes it's about hearing the quiet shifts in someone's breath, about noticing when someone withdraws instead of assuming the worst, about understanding that silence can be a language, one that says, "I'm hurting," or "I'm tired," or "Please don't give up on me." Their home grew warm again, not instantly, not perfectly, but in the small, repeated ways two people choose each other after almost losing everything. And if this story touched something in you, if you've ever seen silence become distance, or felt unseen in the place you loved the most, then share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment, tell me where this story found you. Hit the like button so more people can discover these quiet truths. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast for more stories that whisper where words often fail. Because sometimes, healing begins not with speaking, but with finally being heard.